Early one morning, as the sun's first light touched the small village, Duga sat on a low wooden stool inside his tiny hut, quietly eating a small plate of cold yam and palm oil with his wife, Ego. They ate in silence. Suddenly, a loud voice shattered the stillness. "Duga, I know you're inside there. Come and bring my money. I'll pull down this rat hole you call a house if you don't bring your dead body out here." Mazi Okeke's angry voice rang through the compound. Duga quickly turned to his wife and put a finger to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. Ego's eyes were filled with worry, but she nodded and sat still. The shouting continued. For a long moment, Duga stayed inside, his heart thudding in his chest. But when the silence stretched outside, he sighed, knowing he had no choice. He stood up, dusted off his ragged shorts, and stepped outside with his head down. "So you finally decided to show your useless face, eh?" Duga lowered his head. "Please, Mazi, give me more time. I will pay. What else will he say? Listen to me. The next time I come here, it will be to sell off this rubbish you call a house." Duga sighed heavily. Without another word, Duga put on his worn-out slippers and left the house. He had many other debts, and he knew the others might come looking for him too. Duga was a meat seller. Every morning, he would take his blunt knife and sit by his small wooden table at the village market, selling fresh meat. In the evening, he would roast suya by the roadside, the spicy aroma filling the air. At first, things were good. His stable was always full of different cuts of meat, beef, goats, even bush meat on lucky days. His voice was always loud as he haggled with customers, his knife scraping against the stone as he sharpened it. People liked buying from him. He was friendly and his meat was always fresh. But Duga had a problem. He was careless with money. Every weekend, he was the loudest man at the village bar, buying drinks for everyone and drinking until he couldn't stand straight. Soon, his carelessness caught up with him. His money finished before he even realized it. He began borrowing just to keep his business running, but the debts piled up fast. He could no longer afford good meat. Instead of big fresh chunks, his stable now held small pieces of tough, cheap meat that nobody wanted. One by one, his customers left. Now, he would sit in his kiosks from morning till night, watching people walk past his store without even looking at his meat. One afternoon, as he sat with his chain in his hands, staring at nothing, his neighbor, Bala, who also sold meat, laughed at him. "Duga, Duga," Bala called, shaking his head as he packaged meat for a customer. "Why are you looking so sad? At least attend to the flies crying for a piece of your meat now. Maybe you can get some money to take home to your wife." That night, when he returned home, he was drunk again. Ego was sitting outside waiting for him. "Duga, why are you like this? Eh? Neither I nor the children have eaten anything since last night. I borrowed a cup of garri this morning for them to drink and it was barely enough. Then you went and spent the only money you had on palm wine. You were a shameless man, Duga." Duga mumbled something, his breath thick with alcohol. His snores filled the night air almost immediately. Ego hissed and stormed inside the hut. Life became a nightmare for Duga. He could not walk freely in the village without someone stopping him to ask for their money. He began waking up before sunrise to sneak out of the house, avoiding his creditors. But no matter how much he ran, his problems always found him. Then one day, something changed. At first, nobody understood how or why. One minute, Duga was the most miserable man in the village, and the next, his business was booming again. It started with his suya. At night, people suddenly began lining up at his stand, eager to buy. The scent of his roasted meat drifted through the air, making mouths water. Soon, word spread. The gods have blessed Duga. In no time, his meat business revived too. During the day, his table was full again, thick, juicy cuts of beef glistening under the sun. His knife flashed as he chopped meat. The customers returned, and this time, they came in even greater numbers. "Duga, give me 2 kilos. Duga, don't cheat me, oh. Add small extra." At night, even more people dragged to his suya stand. The smell alone was enough to make someone's stomach cry. The flames danced as the meat sizzled on the fire, the pepper and spices crackling. Duga was no longer running from debt. He was paying it off one by one. He rebuilt his hut and took good care of his family. One evening, Duga was at his favorite palm wine bar, laughing loudly with a group of men. His belly was full and his face shone with excitement. He slapped the wooden table and called out, "Mama Kechi, give everybody to their field. Duga is here." The bar erupted in cheers. "Duga, Duga, the money man," the men hailed, raising their calabashes of palm wine. Mama Nkechi, the owner of the bar, was excited as she hurried to fill more cups. Hours passed and the sky grew darker. The men drank and cheered, their voices rising with the night breeze. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the noise. "Ah, Duga!" The entire bar went silent. Heads turned towards the entrance. There stood Ego, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist, her face twisted in anger. "Duga, so this is where you waste your time and money?" she yelled. Mankechi stepped forward with a nervous smile. Ego, calm down. Shut up. You are the evil behind this nonsense. Anyway, I'm not here for you. Before Duga could react, Ego grabbed his arm. "We are going home." "Ah, Ego, don't embarrass me," Duga protested weakly. Back at home, Ego was fuming. "Ah, Duga, only a fool learns a lesson twice. The gods finally smiled on you again, yet your foolishness refuses to leave you. What kind of man are you?" Duga sat on the floor trying to stay awake. He waved his hand lazily. "I am a rich man for life. Do not fear. See, I have made enough money to go round, my love," he said, reaching out to touch her. Ego stepped back in disgust. She turned to go to bed when Duga mumbled something about how he made his money. There, he revealed part of his secret. His words were low, almost lost in the night air. When Ego heard them, her body froze. She spun around, her eyes wide. "What did you say?" she whispered, looking shocked. Immediately, she rushed to him and closed his mouth, looking around in fear to make sure no one heard. "Duga, I believe you now. Let's go to bed," she said as she dragged him to bed. She was unable to sleep that night. She lay beside her snoring husband, trying to understand what she had just heard. The next morning, Duga was already dressing up, eager to leave early, the way he always did. But this time, Ego stood by the door, blocking his way. "Ego, what is it this time?" Duga sighed, adjusting his shirt. Ego crossed her arms. You're not leaving this house until you make some things clear to me." Duga groaned. What is it that cannot wait for later? Come, leave it, I'm already very late." She studied his face. Okay, she said, stepping aside. Duga grumbled and hurried out. Later that morning, as Ego was sweeping, a visitor arrived. It was Nneugo, the village women's leader. "Ego Nwabanyi, how are you?" Nneugo greeted warmly. Ego quickly dropped her broom and welcomed her. She rushed to the kitchen and returned with a plate of suya. No one rejected Duga's suya. Nneugo smiled as Ego placed the plate before her. "Ah, thank you, my dear. But you shouldn't have bothered though. I ate before coming. I'm okay. I don't need the meat." Everyone knew Ego Nwa as a dramatic woman, but only few have experienced it. Ego smiled and quickly reached for the plate. Forgive my bad manners name. Don't worry, let me take it back." No. Nego held her hand quickly. "I never said you should take it away. Even if I will not eat it here. I'm not hungry. I will take it home when I'm leaving." Ego smiled and set the plate back. After a few bites, Nego leaned forward. "Ego, I actually came to ask for your help." Ego's eyes narrowed slightly. "Help?" Nego nodded. "You see, your husband's business is doing very well. Since he has many customers, he must need a helping hand. I was hoping you could talk to him to employ my son Ugo if he can work for Duga. It would help my family a lot." Ego looked at the empty plate of suya and smiled before saying, "It's okay, Nne. I will tell him when he comes back today. I'm sure he'll be happy to help." Nego's face brightened. "Thank you, my dear. May the gods bless you." As soon as Nego left, Ego clapped her hands together. "Look at her. Come and collect job now. People, she muttered. Her mind drifted back to the past when Nego and other women spread rumors that she and her husband were cursed, warning people not to help them. She shook her head and went back to sweeping. That night, as Duga and Ego sat together, discussing, she said, "Duga, I know the truth now. You might as well tell me everything. What is it that you're hiding?" Duga stared at her for a long time, then sighed. "You must never speak of this to anyone," he warned. "I understand, I know." That night, he told her the rest of the secret. Ego listened carefully. Unfortunately, since the day Duga shared the secret with her, Ego started having nightmares. Every night, she would wake up suddenly, sweating and trembling. In her dreams, she saw things she could not explain, but she said nothing to her husband. When he asked, she forced a smile and said, "It's just a dream." One night, deep into the darkness, Ego turned to Duga and shook him. "Duga!" she whispered urgently. "Duga!" Duga groaned and turned. "What is it?" "It's time, oh," she said. Duga's eyes snapped open. He rose up immediately. Thank you," he said as he reached for his tools. Ego watched as he hurried out of the hut, disappearing into the night. Every time he left like this, fear clutched her heart. She could never sleep until he returned. Duga moved fast through the dark path, his feet barely making a sound. The night was silent except for the distant hoot of an owl. He knew the way well. He had walked this path too many times. His heart pounded, but it was not for fear. It was excitement. He gripped his knife tightly, his other hand holding a lantern to light his way. Ego sat in the hut. She could not sleep. She knew what Duga was about to do. Her stomach twisted. She pressed her hands to her chest and whispered a prayer. Duga reached the place. A thick bush surrounded it, hiding it from anyone passing by. He set down his lantern and moved closer. The pit was deep, and inside lay fresh bodies. Duga grinned. The charm was still working, he said. He climbed into the hole and got to work, his knife flashing in the dim light. But Duga was not alone. A man stood behind a tree watching. He had been walking home from a hunt when he heard strange noises. At first, he thought it was an animal, but when he crept closer, he saw the truth. His heart raced. He could not believe what he was seeing. Duga, the famous SUYA man, was cutting up a human body like it was just another goat. The man covered his mouth to stop himself from shouting. He took a step back, then another, careful not to make a sound, but his foot mashed a dry leaf. Duga froze. His heart jumped. He turned sharply, eyes wide, scanning the darkness. "Who is there?" he barked, gripping his knife. The man did not wait. He turned and ran, crashing through the bushes. Duga cursed and scrambled out of the pit. He grabbed his lantern and ran after the man. Duga's heart pounded. If the man got away, it was over. The village would know. Everything would be destroyed. But he could not catch him. The man was too quick. By the time Duga reached the village, it was too late. The man was already at the chief's place. The chief stepped out, rubbing his eyes. "What is this noise in this early morning?" The man turned to face everyone, his chest heaving. I saw it with my eyes. Duga is a murderer." Shouts filled the air. "Duga? What are you saying?" the chief asked, frowning. "Duga does not sell cow meat or goat meat. He is feeding us human flesh." The crowd exploded in shock and horror. Women clutched their wrappers, some holding their stomachs as if they would throw up. Duga ran into the scene breathless. "Lies, lies," he shouted. "This man is jealous of me. He wants to destroy my business." The chief raised his hand and silence fell. He turned to the man. "Are you sure of what you're saying?" "Yes, chief. I saw it. I saw him cutting a human body far away in the bush." Duga's legs trembled. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The crowd turned to Duga, their eyes burning with anger. "Kill him! Kill him!" Duga shook his head wildly. No, I did nothing. This is a trap." But before anyone could grab him, a broken, trembling voice spoke. "It is true," Ego said. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, her face pale and her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "It is all true," she repeated, her voice cracking. Duga turned to her, his body going cold. "Ego, no, shut up." But she did not stop. "The priest gave him a charm. It makes people fall into the pit. They die. My husband butchers them for the soya and meat you buy. The charm also makes people crave his meat. That is why the whole village keeps buying from him." The villagers screamed even more. Duga grabbed Ego's arm. "You have killed us," he hissed. Ego freed her arm. "I was already dead the moment you told me the truth," she sobbed. The chief raised his staff. "Take them." The men dragged Duga and Ego to a large fire. Duga's children cried loudly, begging the chief to spare their parents, but no one listened. The fire roared as the villagers watched the couple burn, their cries mixing with the crackling fire. The chief closed his eyes, shaking his head. May the gods forgive us all. When the fire died, the village fell into silence. The sun rose the next morning, but the village would never be the same again. The scent of SUYA no longer filled the air, and at the spot where Duga's fire used to burn, only ashes remained.